Photos looking downward on multiple levels of the disabled persons organizations in the Denmark building. And it's the most accessible building in the world. The cost of the building is actually 10% lower than conventional buildings. And it's a great example of how effective planning for universal design at the beginning of the project can actually yield a dynamic outcome for everyone. So I came across this quote, luckily before coming to the AUB Summit, it really kind of summed up why I'm here, but also the relationship I've established with Jennison. Says, great perils have this beauty that they bring to light the fraternity of strangers, and that's what we're doing with accessibility every single day. I love that I can call somebody up on a phone and say, I'm about accessibility, and they're like, cool, me too, let's talk. And we already have this understanding of trying to help people. So Jennison, I'm going to have you introduce yourself. I have your slide up there.
Sure. So I'm Jennison Asuncion. While I do work at LinkedIn, I'll say what I said yesterday, that I'm actually on vacation from LinkedIn, so the views are my own, but also they're supported by my 20 years of co-directing the Adapt Tech Research Network, which looks at information communication technology accessibility and the lived experiences of college and university students with different disabilities and impairments back in Canada. I've been working in accessibility for about 10 years, just over 10 years full-time now, and I co-founded Global Accessibility Awareness Day, which is the third Thursday of May. So this year it will be May 16th, and I will stop there. I'm happy to be here, and I will be contributing to some of Jeremy's stuff, although he is the expert here. But then I will come back and talk about some resources at the end that people can turn to for accessibility questions.
Thank you, Jennison. My name is Jeremy Seda. Just kind of have some random hodgepodge of information, but it'll all make sense. I will kind of bring this all together in one nice packaged deal. My passion for accessibility actually can be pinned back to Macromedia, Max 2003, before it was absorbed by Adobe, and I heard I had to go to this session as a Flash developer, which was very direct and to the point, saying, Flash developers, stop making your applications hell for people with disabilities. It's like, okay, I need to check that one out. Later on, I took that passion for accessibility into American Cancer Society and their national home office as the director of online productions, and just everything we produced, I wanted to be sure that we were really trying to hone in on accessibility issues, but by no means could we achieve everything. Then I actually did a lot of work for the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. It was Flash development, but when I more or less was being introduced to the position, they said it's 508 compliance, and you're going to do some Flash development too. And they weren't kidding. It was an amazing development experience that really opened up to my eyes to the problems that people with disabilities face when using rich internet applications. Transition to Big Bend Community College again. Very passionate as a web and multimedia developer to make the website accessible. Then Washington State policy came online and said everybody has to write an accessibility policy, and you have to designate somebody as the IT accessibility coordinator for the institution. And so then the leadership looked to me and said, well, we think you have the most experience, why don't you do it? And felt like that, okay, I will throw myself on this grenade, and got a lot of experience and a lot of knowledge from writing my first policy with that institution. Segue to the present, working at North Idaho College as their IT accessibility coordinator. And the last point I have up there is talking about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I'm a professor of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and it's very actually relevant to, I find, accessibility, because there's a similar pathway there of, you never get to a point in Jiu-Jitsu where you say, hey, I'm here, I'm done. I'm never going to be better than I am today. It's just a continual journey of improvement, and always trying to be better every single day. So that being said, we'll get to why we're calling this the Dynamic Saw. So on the slide here I have a picture of a very primitive saw with just 4 blades, and then a bigger one with, looks like, I think I've got, if I can count right, 8 blades. So accessible technology is like a saw that institutions are using to cut through accessibility issues. However, that saw must get bigger, it needs to grow new teeth, and evolve to cut through more problems and harder materials. And I have a colleague that actually I have up here, Dr. Thomas Scott from North Idaho College, and he said this, I think the first week I was there, and it was just summed it up perfectly. He says, "It is unsustainable for one person or one department to handle all the needs that need to be done with making electronic resources accessible." And he was speaking from one academic program needing to fast track all their materials in order to get funding, and one of the stipulations was it had to be accessible. So they did that for one single course program for the college and said, no, there's no way we could do this for the whole institution, and we're a department. Okay, so on the next slide here, I've got an even bigger saw blade with more teeth. I'm not going to bore you guys and count those. So more technology can be added to increase efficiency and focus on doing the right thing. However, with more teeth on that saw blade, there's more maintenance to keep each tooth sharp and cutting effectively. And here's the last saw blade where we've got multiple grooves and slots in there and much more teeth. And this is meant to demonstrate effectiveness. And in order to become effective and do accessible technology the right way, an institution must have more people to help and support advance the solutions. Sounds expensive. Another good quote from actually a gentleman that Jennison knows very well and introduced me to, Matt May of Adobe. Got his picture there, and this kind of summed up one of these problems. It's a simple problem, but it's not an easy solution. What we have are a few people who know a lot about accessibility, but what we need are a lot of people who know a little bit about it. So now we can actually get to, once we work past this metaphor, we can work on some of the strategic tips that we've kind of assembled, and that's what we're really trying to do is go through this and give you guys some really good ideas, and hopefully the selfish side of us will get some tips back from you. So moving on to first strategic tip is defining your accessible technology prioritization. So what projects do you think you should handle first? Well, if you're dealing with the Office of Civil Rights or any kind of legal action, that's probably going to be your first priority, right? You're going to remediate those issues that are specifically being addressed in that legal case or Office of Civil Rights OCR complaint. The next prioritization would be anything that you are specifically making public out there. Like a good example is maybe the board meeting video that you need to have out there for the public to see and even comment on. We better make sure that's accessible, especially if you're saying it's public. Third, the accommodation request, when somebody says, hey, they may or may not say they have a disability, but they need an accommodation for their classrooms, for their classes. You gotta take those serious as well. Fourth is utilization. Let's say you guys put a video out there that just goes viral. All right, well, if you didn't make it accessible and you posted it, you probably better focus on getting accessible if it's getting out there in a viral fashion. Critical information, that's any emergency messaging. And that's a very important thing that gets often overlooked. I know just about every campus security department is going to try to get their emergency information out on the website, on mobile push text, on taking over the computer on the desktop as well as maybe the phones. There's even alert beacons that can be placed strategically around campus to alert folks of emergency and what to do. But you never really know it's accessible until you put it through the ringer with somebody with disabilities. Have to put it through the ringer with a lot of people with disabilities and see how an emergency drill happens. And that's one of those things that, like I said, gets often overlooked, but if you actually had an emergency and a person with disabilities needed that information and did not get it, I wouldn't want to be working for that institution. And then 6 is everything else. So this level of prioritization is not meant to say like, this is a 10, this is a 9, it's just what you should focus on, but they're all important objectives.
So can I just add a couple of
Please do,
things?
yes.
So just in terms of the public information, because our target audience here is higher ed, I would also include things like your course catalog, making sure all of that is accessible, the homepage, and there's tools that you can use that many of you probably have on your campuses that will point out which are the most frequently visited pages, to your point, Jeremy, before. Mm-hmm. Because when it comes to a person with a disability, if they're coming to your website and your website's not accessible, that sends a bit of a signal mm-hmm. to the potential student coming in of where the commitment lies. So that's what I would add on that in this section.
You pretty much nailed it there, Jennison. That's the course catalog is probably one of the #1 areas where we see higher ed failing is providing an accessible course catalog, and that's usually a pretty big page or a lot of content.
Yeah, and the registration flow, right? Mm-hmm. Just registering. And the other thing, and I think, Jeremy, it kind of goes without saying, but what we should say is that, you know, you're going to build up your priority list, but no one's saying you have to do everything in year one.
Yeah.
Right? It's because everyone wants to, and that's the biggest mistake people make, is they try and take on too much. You need to be really realistic in what you can do and what you can commit to for a roadmap.
Yeah, from the talk yesterday, luckily there's other speakers that attribute or saying the same thing of make it 1% better.
Yeah.
Don't focus on the 100% or you're going to go nuts. So the next slide I have here is briefly talking about this, doing this risk assessment. I found this extremely valuable at North Idaho College, where I used a risk assessment from Oregon State University. And if anybody wants to download that for themselves, it's an excellent tool, but it's at bit.ly/2, capital F, capital E, T, capital N, capital K, capital E. And so what you do is it's just a basic spreadsheet where you're identifying, hey, these are the risks for whatever. It doesn't even have to be about accessibility. And then you define what's the likelihood of that risk actually happening and what impact it's going to have on that organization. And from that, it plots that specific item on a grid called a heat map, where it's green in the bottom left and goes towards red in the top right, and it will plot your risk item appropriately. So it's very good, it's very general. I have a more specific one that I've adapted from this that is more geared towards accessibility. I don't like just subjectively saying, well, I think the impact is going to be this, and I think that the likelihood is going to be that. I like to have something that feels more structured, not just my opinion. So I have those broken out to other ways to quantify that data. No, very, very helpful.
I think the one thing to think about when you're dealing with risk as well is risk to whom. So, and I'm not sure, I haven't seen, Jeremy, your particular risk assessment, but if you're looking at websites, you want to break it down. Like, so this might be inaccessible to someone who is totally blind using a screen reader, but it is accessible to someone with a disability that prevents them from using a mouse, as an example. I just pulled that as an example out of the air, but the point is the risk might be higher or lower depending on if you're looking at one particular disability or impairment. And it's more just to keep things in perspective. I'm not saying that you should treat any of these items and not make them priority for all people with disabilities. Mm-hmm. But sometimes when you have to make trade-offs, or when you just want to understand, and sometimes the higher-ups want to know, what is the actual impact for someone who's blind? Mm-hmm. What is the actual impact for someone who's deaf? It just allows that level of granularity.
Yeah, excellent. And the other thing for specifically talking to the higher-ups, or Jennison too, is that heat map is gold. I can show that everybody, I've printed out this big spreadsheet, and the first thing people say is like, my gosh, that is a lot of information, that's very small, I don't care about that. But when I drop that picture, or can describe to them, okay, Jennison, our web accessibility is going to be the riskiest issue that we have to deal with because it's here and this other item's there.
That's our saw sound, by the way.
Yeah. We got the sounds queued up and everything. So that heat map is gold because anybody understands that.
Oh yeah, and that, again, I can't reiterate, particularly when you get down to looking at websites and digital properties and wanting to understand, because the big question people will say is, so how accessible are we? Or where are our pain points? And for the folks upstairs who have little time, they just want to see whether you're using a bug tracking system like a Jira or something else. There has to be an easy way to output a report that shows where things stand in a very precise data visualization format.
Nice. So now we'll get on to the 5 tactical tips. So tactical is going to be more things that we can do today, right? So number 1, website accessibility. Yeah, that saw's going, guys. Yeah. So I love that somebody actually brought this metaphor up yesterday of how to eat an elephant. Anybody? Well, yes, bite by bite, one bite at a time. It's, yeah, website accessibility, I think that's one of the biggest ones, especially for an institution this size. And I mean, unless you're a one-man show that has your website with 5 pages, you could do that. You can make it accessible in a day. Institution, it's going to be a lot harder, especially with multiple people contributing content. So we have a bunch of tips here we'll just throw out there, and Jennison's going to throw some in there in case I miss something too. So skip to navigation link. If somebody's using a keyboard, it'd be nice if they hit tab. The first link they come to is a link that says skip to content or skip to navigation, and it's actually that actually comes from like a web content accessibility guideline. It's just allowing the option for them to skip over that repetitive information if they want. And one of the big ones, I have it up there in bold, is headings. Having, instead of just like making your font bigger, to visually represent headings using the heading tags, the H1 through H6, and logically stepping through those heading tags. Did you ever read that on that, Jennison? You look like
Yeah, no, I was just going to say the other advantage of and this is, we don't want to get too technically code, but adding the headings, however way you choose to do that with your levels and such, it allows someone with a screen reader to navigate by heading. So it gives them a sense of structure of the page, but it also allows a screen reader user in particular to use a hotkey. All screen readers have this ability, so you can skip through sections very easily.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you. Descriptive link titles. That's one of the biggest pet peeves that I think I hear from people is if you have click here. Okay, not descriptive enough. Maybe you have 2018, 2019 course catalog. That's a descriptive link. Visually, people are going to know that's a link, and then somebody using a screen reader, they're actually going to get told what that link is, rather than click here. We'll click here for what?
And you can hide visually if that's a concern, because I know for some people it's like real estate space taken up, but you can hide that. And again, for screen reader users in particular, it allows, because many screen readers allow you to bring up a list of links. So to Jeremy's point, if you have a list of links that all say click here, or learn more, out of context, that doesn't mean anything. So that's definitely helpful. And certainly also for people who use voice dictation software, like Dragon or one of those, to be able to say, the actual link name instead of like a click here link is good.
The next one we have is alt text. So I'll abbreviate this just because I think everybody knows what it is, but just adding the alt text and images and other visual objects to explain what it is. Even if it's, I want the screen reader to ignore this altogether and putting a space in the alt text so it tells the screen reader that it's really nothing, it's a decorative image, okay? But beyond that, adding alt text, getting meaningful. Like I like to actually, if I have a picture, I like to actually try not to say like 4 people standing in a room. Or I would like to say, Jennison Asuncion, Jeremy Seda, standing up, giving a presentation, giving it a little bit more depth so don't ignore the experience that somebody with a screen reader has.
You also want to make sure that it's brief, like Twitter style, 140 to 180 characters at most. And if you're already describing the image within the actual text itself, then it's not necessary. And we could certainly speak for 40 minutes just on approaches to alternative text.
Mm-hmm. So next one, form labels, and fire through some of these as our make sure we conserve our time. Text size stepper, being able to control how big or small the text is. Not using tables for layout. My hope that my grand hope is that people are using more CSS, but you still run across people that are using the old school way of using tables. Why? Because it's easy. You know, then learning CSS, I can just drop stuff in the table and remove the borders, make it invisible. It looks good to me, but when screen readers encountering that table, the experience gets confusing all over again. And using an accessibility checker.
There's enough out there.
Yeah.
And free ones too, some good ones.
Yeah. So, yeah, let's go on to the next one here. So Microsoft Word, a lot of the same things, so we don't have to repeat these, but headings. It's, again, so super important. I can't stress that enough. I'll say one thing on this that's one of my colleagues said back in the United States. She was saying, you know, sometimes you can get upward, you can make an accessibility improvement of a document upwards around 70 to 80% just by having your headings dialed in. It's like, wow, that much? It's like, yeah. I mean, if you could give anybody one tip on how to make the document accessible, just tell them, use headings and use them appropriately. Wow, okay, that's easy. She's like, yeah, start with something easy. Again, alt text. And now using the styles. I don't have time to really go and show you guys how to customize those styles how you like in a very easy fashion, but it is possible. It's nice to use styles because for some reason, if your heading 1 style changes, you don't have to change it everywhere in the document, you just update the style. Using table headings, that might change the way you are actually structuring your tables to make sure that you can have table headings, but having column and row headings make that data actually so much easier to understand for somebody that's using a screen reader. Have anything to add about tables?
No, but just to maybe, for expediency, what's also good is the latest Office suite has an accessibility checker as well.
Yeah.
So even if you don't know anything about accessibility, you can use the built-in accessibility checker, whether it's Word, PowerPoint, etc., and it will flag and point out all of your issues for you. Some of them that it will pick up itself, others it will say you have to check these manually. But I think that's a great innovation, and it takes. We don't expect every person who's creating these documents to be an accessibility expert. So Microsoft was good enough to include this to make it easier for faculty, for example, who are putting together documents. And then you can save stuff as a PDF and maintain the accessibility as well if you need to.
Excellent. And again, not using tables for layout. And a feature that I knew was available but didn't think about it for accessibility is using columns. So if you like the whole column structure of a table to lay out information, you could have all that content sequentially written out in your document and then just use columns to create the layout. And for a screen reader, it reads it as if it's just the same one structured content that as if it was just written out like in paragraph form. Contrast, and as Jennison said, the accessibility checker. Meetings and presentations. We've tried to make sure that we're using fonts that are as large as possible as we can cram in there. And for somebody who's a little OCD like me, it kind of bugs me if I'm not using the same font, the same size. Okay, well, what's the goal of my presentation? Is to make me happy with it or to make everybody else happy with it and have the widest audience? It's obviously the latter. Describing visual aids, that's something I'm still working on, but think about it like this. If we need to use alt text to get people to understand what the images are, we need to do that in our visual aids, especially in our presentations. If I got a picture up there, I should be describing what's in that picture in a meaningful way. Handouts, something I luckily dawned on from preparing for an event was I had a low vision person coming to my meeting, and I like a nice neat agenda that is going to be on one page. And that means I'm going to make the text really small to get it all on one page. And that's going to be, pardon me saying so, it's going to be hell for somebody who has low vision. Okay? So, and especially we're talking about not just people with disabilities, but the elderly. they're heck, my parents, even some of my friends, they're like, man, I can't read the stuff that you send me. Can you make the font bigger? So think about just even preparing a handout, having it ready, in a larger font. It was so cool when I actually did that and gave it to the person that was low vision, and she was ecstatic that I did that. She says, nobody ever does this, and this is going to make it so much easier. I can actually focus in more on what's being discussed in the meeting rather than trying to read tiny little notes. Do you have any other good tips, James?
Yeah, no, we talk meetings, presentations, and again, obviously this would work in the classroom, right? So all these tips.
Absolutely.
I think what's also good, if it's possible, like if this is a meeting that's being scheduled or a course, whatever, just having a statement on the meeting invitation or however you're presenting the meeting to say, hey, if you need an accommodation that will allow you to participate in the meeting, please get in touch with me. That sends a signal of inclusion to everyone who's coming to the meeting. Some people, like myself, would probably say, email back saying, if you have any material that you're going to be showing or sharing or passing out, please send it to me in electronic format ahead of time so I can use it on my laptop. So that's one example of that. But just keeping that conversation open. So like I said, again, inviting people to signal that they might need they might have a requirement, like sign language or whatnot, to be able to participate. And that goes for all kinds of student activities too. We want to make sure that students can, it's not only about classroom stuff, it's about social activities and all that as well, and clubs.
I gotta say, I'm stealing that idea, Jennison. I'm running with that idea when I get back to Idaho. That's excellent. Okay. So, learning management system, obviously, we're going to deal with an LMS if we're an educational institution. So, a lot of them come built in with web accessibility tips and just getting people to utilize that information to make sure the material is accessible. A lot of it's similar to what you would do for a web page. One of the tips I like to give faculty is for somebody who's saying, what is the path of least resistance for accessibility within LMS? Why don't you just put all your content in the LMS? I mean, do you want to become a pro at remediating PDFs or making accessible Word documents? If you can put all your information in the LMS, then it's only one tool that you're having to work with to make accessible. But if you feel you need to have a PDF version, well then great. You're going to have fun remediating PDFs. So if you can encapsulate that information in one system, it's going to be much cleaner for you for getting those accessibility requirements done. All right, the next one is talking about freeware and inexpensive apps. This becomes more common amongst like adjunct faculty, people that work outside but then might teach a course here. They're always looking for the most effective tools that work for them. You know, Google Documents, Prezi's is another one, and those aren't always the best as far as accessibility goes. And it's very tough to like enforce that people don't use them. But that's one of the things we're working on in North Idaho College is to work with not only faculty, but adjunct faculty and say, we would prefer you guys use these baseline set of applications or web apps. You know, and if you have questions about the accessibility of other ones that we don't have listed, please talk with us and let's see what we can do.
Can I ask a quick question about
Yeah,
about
question.
LMS? Are there particular LMS that you suggest using? I mean, Moodle's widely used,
Yeah.
but I found it difficult at times to function.
So I can start in Germany, and none of these are strict endorsements, but the companies that are talking a lot about accessibility are companies like Blackboard, companies like Desire to Learn. Yeah, those are the two ones to me at the minute stand out. Are there any other ones?
Yeah, and again, it's not an endorsement other than I've used it a lot. Canvas, there's some really good accessibility tools built that you can add on to Canvas, make it excellent. Yeah, like Jennison.
Go ahead. No, I would say like if you're shopping around for an LMS, best way to find out accessibility-wise is just see first of all on the website itself if they have anything there, and then go directly to them by email and say, do you have a dedicated person or team responsible for accessibility, and what are the features? And it will be very obvious, because of course salespeople will tell you, oh yeah, of course we'll make it accessible. But if you need something here and now, you need to ask the same types of due diligence questions with LMS companies around accessibility as you would around security and data privacy and all of that stuff. There should be no difference in that level of rigor.
Absolutely. A couple that I would say kind of stay away from that have caused me some problems is Wix and Prezi. Those ones I've tried very diligently to make those tools, make something accessible with those tools, and have not been successful. We reached out to them, and that's the other part is, if you really like these freeware apps and it's inaccessible, start hammering the companies with contact us. Just say, when are you guys going to work on this accessibility stuff? Maybe give them a tip or two about things they could do to make it a little easier for these things to become accessible.
I'd go even further to say, I'd contact the company and go, we'd like to use your product, however, ... so when will? Because there's strength in numbers, and particularly if it's AUB knocking at a door of a software company, there's some credibility and some stuff that can happen there. And you can ultimately also end up helping steer the pace of accessibility or the roadmap.
So next slide is really good accessibility resources that Jennison wanted to mention. I think they're excellent. I use some of these as well.
Sure.
So starting with
I'll just go real quick. You have them all on the screen, so I encourage people to photograph that or do whatever. But the Access Technology Higher Education Network, as the name might connote, is all about everything that we're talking about here. So it's a great resource. You have the website there. They also have an email discussion list. For more general accessibility topics, the WebAIM email discussion list, I like to call it the accessibility water cooler. There's no stupid question to ask. They're just questions to ask. I will say that Twitter is a big place where you can find information on accessibility. The A11Y hashtag is what you'd want to tag any question with, or if you want to follow everyday accessibility topics. A11Y is shorthand. Between A and Y there are 11 characters. So that's where that came from. And Medium, if you want some more thought posts, there's a lot of interesting stuff there as well. Let's go to the next slide. Looking at some other social media, LinkedIn, Facebook have groups dedicated to accessibility. If you go on to either of those websites and search under groups for the word accessibility, you'll find all kinds of different things there. And finally, for the more technical, the developers, engineers types, Stack Overflow is a great resource. Now, I will say with something like a Stack Overflow and Medium, you have a lot of people who have opinions and different ways that they think you should be making things accessible. So take things with a grain of salt.
You might run into a curmudgeon or two.
Yes, yes. So that's all I have to say on resources. There's a lot of stuff on teaching and learning, and you can contact either of us. We'll show our contact information at the end. We can recommend specific resources for your particular need, because there is a lot out there, and like anything else, there's a lot of outdated material, we'll say. We've got 10 minutes.
Cool. So your contact information, we got that up on the slide. I'll have you ramble that off.
So you can reach me via email. My first name, Jennison.Asuncion@gmail.com. You can find me on Twitter @Jennison. I was thankfully the first Jennison on there. You can also find me at jennison.ca, which happens to be my LinkedIn profile. And I would be happy to connect with you and provide more details from what you've gained from this talk.
And again, my name is Jeremy Seda. My email is jp, as in psychologist or phonics, jpseda@nic.edu. And my Twitter is @S_E_O_A_111Y. The website is www.nic.edu/A11Y. With that, we'd like to open up, see if you guys have any specific questions.
I want to add something more. For the headings, other than streaming stuff. So basically, for Google to know your website is for the SEOs and stuff. Having headers, it's a very important thing to do.
Having headers and also alternative text also helps boost SEO. And caption, providing transcripts for your podcasts or any of that.
Yeah, my other hat was a web developer, and I find a lot of times, a lot of the things you're doing with accessibility are also some of the things you do with search engine optimization. That's why I have SEO AO11Y as my handle, because it makes sense. You're doing the same thing in a lot of cases.
But just riffing a little bit here, I think that we are facing a little bit of a aging faculty. So even for faculty, I mean, making sure there's good color contrast, making sure you can either scale fonts. Well, you should be doing that through your browser, but just having those abilities there, because there are people who are wearing glasses. They're not going to consider themselves having a disability or impairment, but they're sure going to benefit from having that ability to do some of those things that might have been put in place for accessibility. I do want to add one other quick thing before I do forget it. If you're using a template system, I'm getting a little bit technical here, but if you're using a system that where web pages are built on templates, you can, sometimes it's easy to fix accessibility issues. It's one of these, like, fix it in one place and it will cascade everywhere else. So different approaches to prioritizing, how you want to prioritize, like once you've set up what you're going to fix this quarter or this year, then you have to go into, like, you're going to fix things by screen, or are you going to fix things by transaction flow, those kinds of things. So those are decisions you also have to make.
Any other questions?
None of this, like, you can make this stuff easy for yourself, you can make it very difficult for yourself. There's also things to consider, like, Jeremy, you were talking about, for like, faculty particularly will go off and build their own websites or might put up their own material. They may or may not use the CMS or LMS. It just depends on your level of governance. We get that, but it's just so important because the faculty piece, obviously if none of those course pages are accessible, as I mentioned yesterday, you could be putting yourself in a position where students with certain disabilities or impairments can't take a class. And whether that's a compulsory class or an optional class, there are implications there for their ability to finish up their degrees.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, and I guess one last comment I'd like to also make is, when I first started in accessibility, it's like I wanted everybody to be as excited and passionate and moving forward with me, and like, oh great, let me lock arms with you and let's go down this accessibility road. And it'd be frustrating to me when I wouldn't even get a little bit of interest. But again, going back to kind of what I was mentioning yesterday, making everything 1% better, you're going to get some people, work with some people who aren't as aggressive as you. But if you can get them to at least starting to make a change in their behavior, saying, hey dude, would you just please add headings to your documents? And get them to do that, and getting them to make a step forward. Hopefully you can get them to take another step forward. And hopefully you get enough steps forward, they start getting momentum towards accessibility.
And I would say, just from my talk yesterday, building empathy is also a good way. Just have those not so supportive faculty or staff, have them join you for a lunch meeting and have a person with a disability there to actually walk through, maybe not their website, maybe their website, who knows. But just actually seeing it, again, it's so for some people just saying, yeah, you have to comply with this, and you have to do this. It means nothing, and they could care less. But when you actually put a person with a disability there, and if not, if you're comfortable enough to be able to demonstrate it, that's great, but the real power is having that person with a disability do it. But empathy is a great way before you need to take other measures to get people in line. Because I'll tell you, in my years working on accessibility, there will be difficult conversations to be had. And it's not going to be all easy. You'll find pockets of excitement, but you will find huge pockets of resistance. And just be ready for that.
Yeah. Great.
Thank you.
Any last questions?
Yeah.
Thank you guys.
Thank you.
Appreciate you showing up.
There's so much more we could have talked about.